good evening, Sumter School District boys and girls. Thank you for joining me yet again for another night of Reading with the Superintendent. As you can see, I have a very special guest who's joined me, and she has a very, very long title, so I'm going to shorten it. Her name is Miss Shelly Galloway, and she's the Executive Director of Communications and the
Community engagement.
And responsible for community engagement. So that's why she's here tonight, to engage you. This evening, we're going to read Michael Bond Paddington with the illustrations by R.W. Alley. And so thank you again, Miss Galloway. And are you ready to begin?
I am. This was actually my most favorite book as a child.
That's a good thing. I'm glad we can read it, and you still like to read. So we're ready, boys and girls? 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me.
1, 2, all eyes on you.
Thank you, Miss Galloway. Let us begin. Mr. and Mrs. Brown first met Paddington on a railway platform. In fact, that was how he came to have such an unusual name for a bear, because Paddington was the name of the station. The Browns were waiting to meet their daughter, Judy, when Mr. Brown noticed something small and furry near the left luggage office. "It looks like a bear," he said. "A bear?" reported Mrs. Brown. "In Paddington Station? Don't be silly, Henry. There can't be."
But Mr. Brown was right. It was sitting on an older leather suitcase marked "Wanted on Voyage." And as they drew near, it stood up and politely raised his hat. "Good afternoon," it said. "May I help you?" "It's very kind of you," said Mr. Brown. "But as a matter of fact, we were wondering if we could help you." "You're a very small bear," said Mr. Brown. "Where are you from?" The bear looked around carefully before replying, "Dark as Peru. I'm not really supposed to be here at all. I'm on a stowaway." "You don't mean to say you come all this way from South America on your own," exclaimed Mrs. Brown. "Whatever did you do for food?" Unlocking the suitcase, the bear took out an almost empty glass jar. "I ate marmalade," it said. "Bears like marmalade."
Mrs. Brown looked at the label around the bear's neck. "Please look after this bear. Thank you."
"Oh, Henry," she cried, "we can't leave him here all day by himself. There's no knowing what might happen to him. Can't he come home and stay with us?" "Stay with us," repeated Mr. Brown nervously.
He looked down at the bear. Would you like that?" he asked. "That is," he added hastily, "if you have nothing else planned." "Oh, yes," replied the bear. "I would like that very much. I've nowhere to go, and everyone seems to be in such a hurry." I like Paddington's hat.
I love Paddington. I like his blue coat.
"That settles it," says Mrs. Brown. "Now you must be thirsty after your journey. Mr. Brown can get you some tea while I go and meet our daughter, Judy." "But Mary," said Mr. Brown, "we don't even know its name." Mr. Brown thought for a moment. "I know," she said. "We'll call him Paddington, after the station." Paddington! The bear tested it several times to make sure. It sounds very important. Mr. Brown tried it out next. "Follow me, Paddington," he said. "I'll take you to the snack bar." That's nice that he gets to try out his name.
And then he gets a snack.
And he gets a snack.
Mr. Brown was as good as his word. Paddington had never seen so many snacks on one tray, and he didn't know which one to try first. He was so hungry and so thirsty that he climbed up onto the table and got a better look. Mr. Brown turned away, pretending he had tea with a bear at Paddington Station every day of his life.
"Henry," cried Mrs. Brown when she arrived with Judy, "what are you doing to that poor bear?" Paddington jumped up to raise his hat, and in his haste, he slipped on a strawberry tart, skidded on the cream, and fell over backward into his cup of tea.
hurt himself.
Yeah, I hope not either. But that tart does look good.
Now he's so messy. I think we better go before anything else happens, said Mr. Brown. Judy took hold of Paddington's paw. Come along, she said. We'll take you home, and you can meet Mrs. Bird and my brother Jonathan.
Mr. Brown led the way to a waiting taxi. Number 32, Windsor Gardens, please, he said. The driver stared at Paddington. Bears is extra, he growled. Sticky bears is twice as much. And make sure none of it comes off on my interior. It was clean when I set out this morning. Bears are extra, huh?
Oh, yes.
And if they're sticky, it's more.
Twice as much.
Means you need to wash your hands.
The sun was shining as they drove out of the station, and there were cars and big red buses everywhere. Paddington waved to some people waiting at a bus stop, and several of them waved back. It was all very friendly.
Paddington tapped on the driver on his shoulder. It isn't a bit like darkest Peru, he announced. The man jumped at the sound of Paddington's voice. Cream, he said bitterly. Cream and jam all over my coat? That sounds like me. Not with a kid, though. He slid the little window behind him shut. Oh, dear Henry, murmured Mrs. Brown. I wonder if we're doing the right thing. So Paddington accidentally put cream all on the cab driver and his interior of his cab. He didn't mean to do it. It was an accident.
I'm sure he can clean that up. Fortunately, before anyone had time to answer, they arrived at Windsor Gardens, and Judy helped Paddington onto the pavement. Now you're going to meet Mrs. Bird, she said. She looks after us. She's a bit fierce at times, but she doesn't really mean it. I'm sure you'll like her. Paddington felt his knees begin to wobble. I'm sure I shall if you say so, he replied. The thing is, was she like me?
It's a nice illustration.
Beautifully illustrated book. Goodness gracious, exclaimed Mrs. Bird. What have you got there? It's not a what, said Judy. It's a bear called Paddington, and he's coming to stay with us. A bear, said Mrs. Bird as Paddington raised his hat. Well, he has good manners. I'll say that for him.
I'm afraid I stepped in a jar of tart by mistake, said Paddington. I can see that, said Mrs. Bird. You better have a bath before you're very much older. Judy can turn it on for you. I dare say you'll be wanting some marmalade too. I think she likes you, whispered Judy. What's not to like about Paddington?
He's my favorite. Paddington had never been in a bathroom before. While the water was running, he made himself at home. First of all, he tried writing his new name on the steam on the mirror. Then he used Mr. Brown's shaving cream to draw a map of Peru on the floor. It wasn't until a drip landed on his head that he remembered what he was supposed to be doing.
It's not difficult to forget what you're supposed to be doing when you get in a nice hot bath.
Exactly.
He soon discovered that getting into a bath is one thing, but it's quite another matter getting out again, especially when it's full of soapy water.
It got a little slippery, huh?
I'm sure. Be careful, making sure the water's not too hot, and that if you stand, you're taking a hold of something so you can maintain your balance.
Paddington tried calling out, help, at first in a quiet voice, so as not to disturb anyone, then very loudly, help, help! When that didn't work, he began bailing the water out with his hat, but the hat had several holes in it, and his map of Peru soon turned into a sea of foam.
Suddenly, Jonathan and Judy burst into the bathroom and lifted a dripping Paddington onto the floor. Thank goodness you're all right, cried Judy. We heard you calling out. Fancy making such a mess, said Jonathan admiringly. You should have pulled the plug out. Oh, said Paddington. I never thought of that.
When Paddington came downstairs, he looked so clean that no one could possibly be cross with him. His fur was all soft and silky, his nose gleamed, and his paws had lost all traces of jam and cream.
The Browns made room for him in a small armchair, and Miss Bird brought him a pot of tea and a plate of hot buttered toast and marmalade. He's being spoiled and comforted.
But doesn't he look good?
He's nice and clean. My puppy acts like that when she gets out of the bath.
Now, said Mrs. Brown, you must tell us all about yourself. I'm sure you must have lots of adventures. I have, said Paddington earnestly. Things are always happening to me. I'm that sort of a bear. He settled back in the armchair. I was brought up by my Aunt Lucy in darkest Peru, he began. But she had to go into a home for retired bears in Lima. Or Lima. Lima or Lima?
Which one?
The home for retired bears.
I would call it Lima.
Lima, okay. He closed his eyes thoughtfully, and a hush fell over the room as everyone waited expectantly.
And so back to our word. You say Lima, I say llama, we say tomato, I say tomato, potato, potato. Let's call the whole thing off.
Exactly.
After a while, when nothing happened, they began to get restless. Mr. Brown tried coughing. Then he reached across and poked Paddington. Well, I never, he said. I do believe he's fast asleep. After all that's happened to him, said Mr. Brown, is it any wonder? Paddington had a long journey and a long day. And as we hope we're doing for you as you prepare for the night, to make sure that as you rest, you relax your mind and make sure everything that's been on your journey is put to the side so you can rest peacefully. Thank you for joining us again this evening. Thank you, Miss Galloway, for joining me and reading to the most wonderful children in the world. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here with us. Thank you, boys and girls, and I look forward to another evening of reading with you tomorrow. Good night.
Good night.